Bring a copy of the notice to all requesting radio stations in the Kenosha News. Purpose of this special meeting is a proposed motion to rescind action taken at the April 28, 2026 regular school board meeting, approving the pre-65 separate underwriting option, a review of agenda items for the May 26, 2026 regular school board meeting, review of current standing committee and agenda review meeting structures, and views and comments by the public. We will start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, Denise.
Mrs. Matter?
Here.
Ms. Stevens? Mr. Tierney?
Here.
Ms. Cullen?
Here.
Dr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Landry? Here. Dr. Bryan?
Here, thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is proposed motion to rescind action that was taken at the April 28th, 2026 regular school board meeting, which was approving the pre-65 separate underwriting option. So at the April 28th regular school board meeting, the Board of Education received information regarding a pre-65 retiree separate underwriting option. Approval of this option would reduce renewal rates for active employees from 9.9 to 8.5%, resulting in an estimated operational budget savings of $566,000. The motion and vote were as follows. Motion to approve the pre-65 separate underwriting option, which will impact renewal rates, moved by Robert Tierney, seconded by Todd Price. Motion carried unanimously. Several board members since then have expressed interest in proposing a motion to rescind the action taken at that board meeting, approving the separate underwriting option. Therefore, in accordance with policy 8810, rules of order, this item is being added to the agenda tonight for discussion and possible action. So with that, I'll defer to Dr. Weiss.
Sure. In front of you are two documents I handed out. One of them is, actually, you've got more than two. I'll call your attention to two. Yeah.
Views and comments, I apologize.
Okay.
No, that's at the end of the meeting.
Can we do that
Comments are
first?
at the
And then
end
we'll
of
go.
the meeting.
I know, but we're going to take a motion to move it up.
I see.
Sorry. I'll do that first and then go on. Sorry about that. I'm going to take a motion on views and comments to move that up in the agenda because I know a lot of them pertain to this particular agenda item. So I'm just going to, is there a motion?
I'll
to
make
move up?
that motion to take views and comments.
Second.
Any discussion on the,
Is this one time or just tonight or what?
just tonight?
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was because we have folks coming up to speak on the topic. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you for that. Apologies. So the first, I'm supposed to go into the rules. Welcome to all who have signed up to speak tonight. The board values your input and interest in KUSD. We'd like to remind you that school board meetings are not public meetings, but official business meetings held in public. I will call you to the podium in order from the sign-up sheet. I appreciate your understanding, but I know everybody here. So any written comments received prior to the meeting have been shared with the full board, and names will be read into the record upon request. To ensure board meetings are conducted in an orderly, productive manner, all public comments, no matter the topic, are subject to the regulations outlined in the sign-up sheet and podium pertaining to time limits, proper conduct, restricted topics of discussion, when board members may respond, reasons for recess and adjournment, and usage of signage. Each speaker will have 3 minutes, and this portion of our meeting will conclude after 45, but we only have 3 people signed up. So when you arrive at the microphone, please state your full name for the record. Our board secretary, Denise Ewing, will keep the time. Our first person is Scott Farnsworth.
Scott Farnsworth, president of the Kenosha Education Association, retired. I had planned on having your entire meeting to prepare my remarks, so Yeah, congratulations, yeah. I outlined for you the problems I have with the decision you made at your last meeting to increase and separate out, for the first time in the history of this district, the pre-65 retirees for a separate rate increase. I think it's ill-advised, and as I pointed out in the letter that I wrote to you, it doesn't save the district any money whatsoever. It simply shifts costs. And it shifts costs in a way that, if the way I look at it, will be long-term detrimental to the district. You're simply increasing your burden on your trust fund to fund the health insurance for pre-65 retirees. And that eventually is going to cause that fund to require even more contributions from the district. Not that I believe that that's necessary, given the health of that fund. But since you look at that going off into the distant future, eventually that will create a greater burden. I think there are better options for you. One of the principal ones being simply that you do have a very healthy balance in that fund, and you are contributing over $4 million a year to that fund, which you do not need to do at that level. And if you want to free up even more money for your general operating fund than you would by increasing the rates on the pre-65 retirees, you can do that by simply reducing your contribution level to your OPEB liability fund. That, to me, makes a lot more sense. Very quickly, in terms of a referendum, let me tell you what you shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be closing schools to save $7.2 million and then increasing your unassigned fund balance by over $7 million the same year. You shouldn't close a school to save $1.2 million and then add almost $4 million at the end of that year to your unassigned fund balance. You shouldn't give your staff half of the CPI increase in their salary the same year that you tell the public you no longer need to do short-term borrowing. You got to quit talking about how well the district is doing and start spending the money that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Next is Karen Keppinen.
Karen Kempinen, Secretary Treasurer of KEA, retired. During the February 18th, 2026 regular school board meeting, I spoke about the discovery that Kenosha, unlike Racine, Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, and South Milwaukee, had a separate hidden AST handbook rich with benefits for employees and retirees that the rest of the KUSD staff did not receive. I mentioned the saying, trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. Some school board members were aware of that agreement for a long time but did not bring it to the public eye. Those actions were among many that have undermined the trust of the community in the district. Fortunately, some other school board members, Bob Tierney, Sabrina Landry, and Carl Bryan in particular, have pushed for more equal treatment of all district employees. That is one step toward repairing trust. Then I'm going to skip this part about the April 28th pre-65 retiree underwriting option, but I want to mention that the motion by School Board President Carl Bryan in collaboration with some other school board members after hearing complaints from community members and employees and KEA that putting that motion to rescind that action on the agenda is another step toward repairing trust. Fortunately, also, School Board Member Bob Tierney has pushed for a long time against some strong opposition from other board members to hold agenda review meetings in public like this, and that's another step toward repairing trust. So in the spirit of continuing to repair trust, what concerns and priorities of the KUSD community constituents will all of you in this room be using to craft the 2026-27 budgets? Will you be ensuring that you provide salary and benefits that attract and retain highly qualified licensed teaching staff to educate the children of our community, which, last time I checked, was the primary mission of public schools? Or will you be prioritizing something else? Your choices and your justification for those choices to the community will decide the fate of a future referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And last is Kathy Andresiak Montemurro.
I came this evening to urge you to reconsider your recent vote to separate pre-65 retirees from the blended health insurance rates. This decision shifts significant costs onto retirees and the OPEB trust fund while providing little to no meaningful savings to the district. Also alarming is that the proposal was not discussed transparently in advance, and many retirees feel blindsided after previous assurances that the board wanted to avoid harming those already retired. In fact, at the January board meeting, you directed administration to engage the actuarial firm Milliman, not Brown & Brown, to conduct a cost analysis of the equalizing modifications included in version 2. It is also important to note that version 2 did not propose any underwriting changes that would separate pre-65 retirees from the blended health insurance rates. Furthermore, the decision undermines trust with both current and future retirees. It is also important to remember that today's retirees spent their entire careers as active employees paying into a system that helped absorb the higher healthcare usage rates of the pre-65 retirees before them. To now isolate and penalize this group feels deeply unfair. Equally troubling is the implication from district administration that pre-65 retirees are somehow irresponsibly driving up costs, when the reality is much simpler. As people age, healthcare needs increase. That is not abuse of the system, it's the predictable reality of growing older. At a time when the district maintains a large unassigned fund balance, there were far less disruptive ways to address budget concerns without placing that burden on retirees. Calling it savings is misleading. It is simply a cost shift onto the backs of people who dedicated their careers to educating and supporting the children and families of Kenosha. I would also point out the inconsistency in how district leadership frames financial decisions. The projected $566,000 in savings from the separation is being portrayed as financially significant, yet the district characterized the approximately $675,000 cost of raises for the already generously compensated AST group for this year as relatively insignificant within the overall budget. That contradiction is difficult to ignore. I respectfully ask that the board bring this matter back for reconsideration and pursue solutions that are transparent, fiscally responsible, and fair to the employees and retirees who dedicated their careers to KUSD. I also support you to urge you to consider continuing agenda review meetings in public. I feel that these are more trust building with the community than I would say that the committees are, since there really is a lot of unclarity or confusion, I would say, over what the purpose of those committees are. However, the agenda reviews I feel are important for the community to know and know what decisions are being made and what are coming forth in front of the board to make decisions. So that's where I'll leave it.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you to all who spoke. Please know that in alignment with state statute, board members will not reply to public comments unless they're related to an item properly noticed in tonight's agenda. We'll do so at the time the item is addressed on the agenda. Thank you very much for that detour, and apologies again for the confusion. It's only my second running meetings here, so now we will go back to the topic at hand.
Is there a need for another, does he need to restate the motion, or can we just move into, I just want to make sure that whatever happens that we don't get stuck on a technicality.
I didn't have an actual motion. I know he read it, but there was no, like,
Okay, so I was just wondering if that
made
had
and
to be read
seconded,
again.
so I would say we need to move it and second it again to begin the discussion.
Okay.
At the April 28th board meeting, there was a motion to approve the pre-65 retiree separate underwriting option, which will impact renewal rates, moved by Bob Tierney, seconded by Todd Price. Motion carried unanimously.
So we need a motion to rescind that if that's what's on the table.
I think Dr. Weiss is going to do a presentation first.
And then
Oh, okay,
And then then there can be discussion and I can
Right.
share it.
okay. Is
I'll
there,
make a motion to rescind the action taken at the April 28th, 2026 regular school board meeting, approving the pre-65 separation underwriting option.
Second?
all right, it's been moved and seconded. Dr. Weiss?
Okay, thank you. And I apologize, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't get stuck on a procedural problem there. So the legal, I'll just draw your attention to the large document on legal paper. Basically, what that document does is it takes everything that's in this PowerPoint that was presented and tried to consolidate it. So I'll just explain what the different charts and the different levels are showing, and then if there's any questions. So starting in the left-hand side, and I'm going to call it a column, even though there's 4 boxes there. On the left side, those are the current, this school year, the current premiums that both the district and retirees pay for health insurance, and you can see that it's divided, each row is divided into different employee categories. And then within those employee categories, the count has, and this is for retirees, those who retired as teachers, administrative support professionals, educational support professionals, and then the AST group. So it has the count, it has the monthly, the total premium, the part paid by the retirees and part paid by the district. Moving one column to the right, this is the, what that increase will be at 9.9%. So again, you can see how that, those costs went up, and this is regardless, this is if the board votes to rescind, this is what they go to. This is kind of what the baseline is for 26, 27. Third column is the amount that they increased at 27%. And again, you can see it's broken up by category of employees, total cost, monthly cost, and then finally, the final column to the right is the difference between 27.9 and 9.9, just to kind of put that into perspective, what those differences would be. Monthly, total annually, and then for each group, for each level of coverage as well. So there are total number of retirees is 247. The total number of active enrollees, so those who are currently working in the district taking health insurance, is 1774. Those are the people who are actually getting the health insurance. So should the board rescind it, it would drop, the total premium and the monthly cost would drop to the second column. Then, just as a reminder, the overall cost for the 1,774 employees would go up by, I believe it's 1.2%. Is that correct, Tarek and Mr. Hampton?
That question?
So I'm sorry, I was doing math and I got nervous there for a second. The total number, so if out of all the total active enrollees, the 1,774, their premiums would go up by 9.9%, which is about 1.4%
1.4% difference.
more
yeah.
than what, so
Right.
that's the trade-off on that.
And a half or 9.9.
Correct. And then also the other trade-off would be the 550,000 roughly in budget, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, any discussion? Ms. Mater?
Okay, I heard from many retirees and a number of those teachers who are going to be retiring or in the near future. I did not hear from any active teachers who basically said, oh, thank you for that 1.4% increase of savings. So I did hear, and what I heard from the teachers who were retiring or had just retired was, we spent 25, 30 years, we were kind of counting on this, and now you are cutting us loose. And at the April meeting, I actually did say I didn't think it was worth it But of course, we have to look at savings. So I am fully supporting rescinding the motion, just simply because I don't feel like the savings is worth it. I think we have to look at other places. And I know that's hard. However, I really don't feel like we should be cutting our retirees loose this way. And what I heard is from people is that we can pay now or we can pay later, and it would simply have the actives having surgeries that they would have delayed until they retired. They're going to have them earlier, and then they're going to use their sick days, and which costs the district more. So, it's just really hard when we look at it, but fully support rescinding the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Landry.
Yeah.
I would have to agree with Mary. It's not worth the savings, especially when reminded about the AST agreement, and that was about $600,000, and that was made to feel light and like it wasn't a big deal. And this, in comparison, if it's going to hurt morale and these retired teachers that put in their service, it doesn't make sense to do it. So I'm in full support of rescinding it.
Dr. Price?
No, I appreciate it. That was my question before about how much the savings were going to be regardless. And I'm sensitive to folks that have dedicated their lives to education for so long. And so I'm also in support of rescinding this too.
Thank you. Mr. Tooney?
Are these by month, like retiree rate, like the 135.76 for teachers on the top one? Is that every month they pay that?
So which row are,
Like the very top one, employee only, if you just go across to retiree, it says 135.
Yeah, that's the monthly amount that we take a draw on if you had single coverage.
All right, so the AST group costs us $41,179 a year because they get it for free. Why is that so different? That's crazy to me. And then with the insurance, like, it sucks because you guys give us the agenda had a little,
yeah.
hey, they're gonna come here, you're
I'm
gonna know all this
sorry.
information, make a decision.
I didn't understand your question there, Mr. Tierney. What was that?
Your AST group pays zero.
That's
They
not,
contribute zero when they retire. They're the only
Accurate.
group that pays zero.
that's not accurate.
It says zero.
No, you're looking at a difference between buy-ups, I believe, but Kevin can.
Is that not the
speak to
retirees'
ASU.
contribution monthly?
ESPs is 0%.
Or ESPs, zero?
And then
Okay. I didn't look at
AST
the ASTs.
is, district
Okay, I looked at
contributes
the
88.
ESPs, never mind. My bad.
That's
on
the
that.
ESPs.
That's ESP,
Yeah.
educational support, which currently
Yep.
don't pay
They
anything
don't
now.
contribute right now.
That's zero.
All right, that's my bad. But then
I-
with the
I just wanna
insurance
make
thing,
sure that was
like- Oh,
accurate.
yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, I just
With
want
the
to make sure I was
insurance thing,
looking
though,
right.
like the agenda review packet had, you're gonna get you're gonna get all this information tonight, and you're gonna make a decision tonight, that you had no time to regurgitate, like, think about it, really.
And we did have several presentations from Brown and Brown.
On that
about-
specific information? to
About
do
this
that?
one, yeah. We did.
When?
Any other discussion? Ms. Cullen, nothing? Ms. Stevens, nothing? No?
I mean, I'm in favor of rescinding it too. I mean, as someone who's retiring myself, like, I understand, like, you put in your time, and so I think it stinks. This has nothing to do with the district or anything. I think it stinks that people have to make decisions about whether to retire or continue working or whatever based on insurance, and that's the reality. I'm only able to retire because my husband is still working and I can be on his insurance, and I know that that's a lot of people's cases. That has nothing to do with this, though. Like, that's outside of our control, but I just want to say that I think it stinks that people have to make decisions about their work based on whether they can get insurance or not, so.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the record, I'm going to be recusing myself because of my mom's on the retiree plan, so. I was just told that earlier I needed to, so. I'm
Oh,
going
and
to
I
be-
just want to point out that I am not, because I am older.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Chair abstains. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we are on to the review of agenda items for the May 26, 2026 regular school board meeting. The first item is the other post-employment benefits discussion, as if we didn't have enough to talk about that already.
Right.
Dr. Weiss.
Yes, so this is, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hamden in a minute.
Yep.
Just as information for the board, there's a lot of information in here and a lot of very technical information. We will be having a consultant from Milliman come in on the 26th to kind of walk through some of the deeper details and the deeper dive. So during the agenda review, it's probably going to be about 10,000 feet. I wouldn't say 30, but realize that when we do have the consultant here who did the study, Mr. Shimolshevsky, I believe, will be able to go into much more detail.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. So I'm just going to give a little recap, and Tanya's driving on the agenda, right? Okay, so Milliman is the third-party actuarial firm that the board directed us to engage. We have to engage a third-party actuarial firm to do these studies just because of the size of our population. So that's not even an option. So going back history, December 9th was when the first question was proposed by the board's insurance consultants, Brown & Brown, what do we really want to do with our retiree offerings? And the decision was made not to do anything radical, not to change what we're doing, because there's other options where you could have fixed contribution amounts, you could have HRAs, which are health retiree accounts, but the decision was made to keep our offerings still the same structure, but look at how we can equalize them, make them more standardized. So that was the first action, December 9th. Then on the 27th of January, remember the board approved a series of standardizing adjustments that took effect right away. And we'll go through some of what those are. And that was primarily the age eligibility, syncing up everybody to be eligible at 55. And then there was an adjustment to contribution to, could you make that a little bigger, possibly? So that first chart, a little bit. So these are the pieces that went into effect. And I apologize for the small print up there, but hopefully you all have printouts and they are online as well. So you see in red, those pieces are the ones that changed effective immediately January 27th. So everybody's age eligibility moved to 55, which if you think about OPEB liability, that has implications because we cover between the start of retirement, so 55 now instead of 57, we added 2 more years. We go all the way up to 65, and then you lose eligibility after 65. Minimum years of service was already synchronized. That was already 15 years across the board. And then the rate premium. So this is what the retiree would pay. So the change that happened on the 27th was to get the interpreters, which is a very small group. I think we're down to 3 interpreters in that group. But their agreement was the first to expire post Act 10. And back then it was being explored to remove all OPEB, other post-employment benefits. That's why you see that particular group had 100% premium rate contribution, which means the district would not pay anything towards their premium in retirement. Luckily, we've not had any interpreters retire under that, so it hasn't become an issue, but it's always been a little bit of a sore spot. So now that action that the board took on the 27th got them back in line. And then the coverage level over here, nothing changed on that. So January 27th, this became the new norm, and then the board also approved some adjustments, and those are listed below here too. Won't go through every single one of them, but the primary line on top, there was a concern with timing of if you make an adjustment to a new plan, like what if there's certain people in situations where the old rules might have benefited more than the new rules. So that first adjustment line is saying whichever one they can choose for current benefit eligible employees, they'll have the option to choose from that first list or whatever you adopt on the new list. That's simply said. And then we list all the adjustments, whether it was to modify the percentage or the age eligibility or to maintain it, which means there was no change. And this one here on the ESPs, that 0% contribution, and ASPs, 10% contribution, you can see that those are not on the new proposals, which now we'll get into. So the board asked us to have Milliman study basically version 2, which was presented that night, and then I believe it was Mr. Bryan that asked for a modification to that, to what if the ESPs remained at 0% contribution. So that's what we'll see. The only difference between version 2 and version 3 is that 0% contribution on the ESPs. Here's version 2. So version 2 was to standardize again. If you could scroll up just a little more, please. So basically, here's the pieces that would change. It would make everybody look like the current teacher offerings, basically. So what we would do is extend the offer to get coverage level at whatever level you retire at between age 62 and 65. Before that, it would be a single plan coverage. So from 55 to 61, if you retire in that window, you would get a single plan covered by the district. The premium rates would all be 12% retiree contribution, all the same. And then we already talked about the age eligibility, that's already in effect. So everybody's at 55. This is the first version that Milliman studied, and then the second one, V3, is exactly the same except for the ESPs maintaining the 0% contribution. In addition to that was the dental insurance offering. So in the study, the way they break it up is version 2 plus dental, so you'll see V2D, and then version 3 plus dental, V3D. Currently, the only groups that have dental insurance coverage are the AST group and teachers from 62 to 65. So that study now would say extend that to all groups. And before I go on into the study highlight, this is where we'll get to the 30,000-foot view. Any questions on the versions and what was studied?
And just to clarify, so V2 and V3 are for employees that are hired after July 1st?
They would be effective July 1st, right, correct. Right, but remember that first adjustment that was approved on the 27th?
Right.
A current employee could elect those new plans
Gotcha.
if it would fit them, if they, for whatever reason, would prefer it.
Okay, thank you. Did any other board members have questions? All right, keep going.
Okay. So then we gave you the attachment of the actual study, and if you have a hard time sleeping at night, feel free to read it. But it's like straight up actuary speak. But it goes through all their methodology. It goes through all of that. It's a complicated process because they get into a very nitty gritty, and they get into how many people are actually going to make it into retirement, and they go by standards that the actuary can discuss. If you want to get into more detail on the actual process of the study, he'll be able to address some of that. But the bottom line gets into, if you could scroll please until you see a table in the study. It's in attachment A. Yep, right there, thank you. This is the results of the study, if you will. So what they're doing is comparing the baseline, and this is just the liability portion. So if you remember back in the annual meeting of electors and the public hearing on the budget, I show you what the actuarial cost for the liability is, and then I show you what our assets are in the fund. And that's where some of the speakers were alluding to, the health of that trust fund. So what you do is you calculate what the liability is, and it's not just 1 year. We gave you the 1 year snapshot because it's calculated as of June 30th at the end of each year. But really, we're working off of a 20-year amortization schedule. That's what the actuaries do. They take it and they extrapolate it out. They say, this is what the cost is today, in today's dollars, but then they apply inflationary trends, they apply medical trends, they apply birth trends, they apply mortality rates, all of that stuff to try to figure out this thing that you're promising today is going to cost, it might cost $30,000 today to promise that plan, but 20 years from now, by the time that person retires, it might cost $100,000. They do that work all built into the study. So that's what this table shows you. It's starting 2025 and it goes down 20 years. That's what that shows. The very first column shows you what the baseline liability is. So this is before we made the decisions on the 27th. That's what the last study that we had showed, that was as of June 30th, 2025. It showed that we had an OPEB liability of $77.9 million for this year. But you can see how it escalates. You can see that by the time you get to 20 years from now, if you could scroll to the very, very last bottom line, please, that turns into $148 million 20 years from now. That's just trending, medical trending, and inflationary increases. Pause there for a second. Everybody okay with that concept? 77 today, almost 78, but that really turns into 148 later. So when we talk about, yes, we have about 92% funded trust when you compare 77 million to what we have in assets in the trust. We're about 8% short of that 77 million. That's what that means. But we have to keep contributing at levels to maintain that so that we can get to a fully funded trust, or at least keep contributing at the actuarial amounts that are determined. But by the time we get to 20 years from now, that trust doesn't need to have 77 million in it. It needs to have 148 million in it. It's a pretty daunting number. And the way we're funding that trust, to remind everybody, is we have an active benefit. Right now, we've scaled that down to 3%. It used to be as high as, I believe, 4.5%. So it's 3% of salary for benefit-eligible employees is an expense in our operating budget that moves over to the trust. And the goal is to move over more than you're spending out. So yes, we're contributing like $4 million. We're also spending out a couple $1 million. And the goal is to have more going in than going out so that you keep growing towards this number. Scroll up a little bit, please. Sorry. DJ Tanya, thank you. So V1, this is the January 27th. V2, V2D, V3, V3D. You'll see it starts off with not much change, but what they do is recalculate what the current year liability is, and then they extrapolate down. Not much change initially because, remember, our biggest group is teachers, so there's not too much change on the teacher group. It's all the other groups that go along with it. And it's not immediate impact because initially there's not too much change. Those rules, as Mr. Bryan just pointed out, would apply to new hires after July 1, 2026. So then you start that timeline, you know, what's the earliest possible somebody that's hired in July could retire with benefits would be 15 years from that date. So that's why you start seeing it escalate as you get down. So really, if you want to look at net impact, you go all the way down to the bottom of that table and you see what the total in 20 years, what's the impact on your total liability. That's the way the actuary will present this information. Any questions on that? But I would also recommend, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of information, but between now and the regular board meeting, if you have specific questions, gather those, and the actuary will be here in person, so you'll be able to ask questions directly.
Yeah. And if you do have questions and can send them to me ahead of time, I can get them to the actuary ahead of time so he's able to work it into his presentation.
That would be helpful,
too.
thank you.
Can you remind me how, you said we fund the trust, it's 3% of salaries?
Correct. For benefit eligible employees. So if you have the chance to get into the retirement benefit, so basically what that means is regular full-time FTE benefit eligible employees. 3% of salaries is expensed each year for that person, and that's what moves over to the trust.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there more to the presentation? No? Okay. I see all these attachments. I wasn't for certain. All right, no further discussion. Item B, proposed option for board director review of the expiring administrative supervising technical policy for inclusion in the employee handbook. Dr. Weiss?
Yep, thank you. And Ms. Reuter's going to go over this with the group. We spent, because there are implications, and I'll let Tanya get into it, but there are implications for the employee handbook as well. So this, I kind of picture the OPEB discussion, this discussion, the employee handbook discussion is all, they're all related. If there's a Venn diagram, they all cross over at some point. And I think as we were working on this, Tanya did a really nice job of putting everything together in a package that made sense when it was presented. So I'll turn it over to her now.
Okay, we're going to go back to the beginning of where this started, specifically because it feels like it was a long time ago, and we have a new board member with us, so we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Back in August, the board directed administration to combine the expiring AST handbook agreement into a single employee handbook for the 26-27 school year, and to present a plan to separate the technical category of employees out of the AST group. That took us to December, when a motion was made to make no modifications to the AST group for the fiscal year. However, we still had some work that we have to do. We have an expiring agreement, so we still have to work on that combining of the agreement into the handbook. And then we also had Mr. Hamden's OPEB piece. So that came forward in January. As he just shared, the adjustments as presented were effective immediately, and you guys engaged Milliman to do the work. That'll be forthcoming on May 26th for your review. This is just recapping that we had an AST agreement. It was a one-year agreement that expires June 30th, 2026. And the work that you're going to see here is our recommendations for how we would combine that into a single employee handbook. There's an Appendix B. Did they get a copy of you guys should have a copy of that draft handbook. So you'll see that. That is not on the agenda for May 26th because the decisions that you make regarding the AST agreement will actually impact what language is brought forth in the final draft for your review, discussion, and action on a handbook. So the handbook is here as a draft so that you can see it visually, but it won't actually come forward for discussion or action until the June 23rd meeting, okay? Just to give you guys some language, we went through, we decided on items that would be surrendered, aligned, changed, or grandfathered. And so I'm going to go through step by step each of those items. Our recommendation is to change the handbook language. Currently, our employees that are under the handbook accrue their vacation time at a different rate than under the AST agreement, and we would recommend changing the handbook language to align with the AST agreement. This would be enhancement for all of the employees who are vacation eligible. And it would align so that they would receive, instead of having multiple years where they're kind of in a stalemate with accrual, they would actually accrue their prorated days and then 15 days and 20 days after each of the years with us. So that would be an enhancement for all of the other employees. The holidays, we would like to grandfather and then align to the existing handbook language. So right now we have 10-month instructional staff and 10-month support staff. Retain spring break and then grandfather the current ASTs with the benefit sunsetting June 30th, 2026, and no others hired on July 1st or beyond receiving the spring break handbooks or spring break time off. This would allow those who have earned that benefit and been receiving the benefit to retain it, but allow it to also go away through attrition for the AST group. We have our tuition reimbursement. This is a surrender and change handbook language. So currently ASTs do receive a greater benefit when it comes to our tuition reimbursement. We are looking to surrender that greater benefit and adjust the handbook language to increase. This becomes pretty cost neutral because there wasn't a lot of tuition requests from the AST group, so we can increase for all other employees, and it becomes a cost neutral item. So it's an enhancement for other employees to surrender and align. We have our sick leave. Currently, ASTs can accrue up to 120 days of sick time, and those with 10 or more years of service in KUSD are eligible for a payout of 50% of their accrued sick days. Our recommendation is to grandfather and change the handbook language. We would like to increase the allotment or the accruement amounts for our 10-month staff from 90 days to 100 days, and this just aligns mathematically because they earn 1 day per month, so that's 100 days total, or times 10 years is 100 days. And then for the 12-month staff, instead of stopping them at 90, it can also go up to 120 days. So that's an enhancement for all employees under the handbook currently. With the grandfathering, again, we would recommend that that is for current ASTs, and then it would sunset June 30th, and anyone hired on or after July 1st would not receive that benefit, so it would go away through attrition as well. Personal injury, this would be surrendering and aligning to the handbook language. Basically, it's the workers' compensation section, and every employee would then just be covered by the workers' compensation section of the handbook. The personal leave, again, surrendering and aligning to the existing handbook language. We do not have a personal leave or time off for adoption or guardianship in our handbook, and we would like to align so that all staff are receiving that same. And then work-related court appearances are considered time worked for all staff. Educational and professional development. This is an offering to ASTs only that can earn up to $4,500 annually in stipends. We would like to surrender that. That is not something that our other employees receive, and so that is something we would like to say we would surrender. There's no alignment in the handbook because it does not exist in the handbook, so it's just a surrender item. Retiree benefits, I put this in here, although this action was January 27th with the adjustments and then will be part of the OPEB discussion, so there's not really action on this piece. However, we do need action, and our recommendation would be to standardize those employee benefits by aligning our vacation accrual, tuition reimbursement, personal injury, personal leave, and the educational and professional development provisions for all staff. And that is what you will see in the bold red in the handbook. And then the second action needed is specifically for that spring break and the sick leave payout, which fall under holidays and sick leave. Option A, which is the recommended way to do this from administration, is to do it through attrition, allowing those who are current ASTs in the district to continue to receive that benefit with it sunsetting June 30th. And no longer being offered after July 1st. This would not negatively impact any employees currently working for the district. Option B would be grandfathering it for those hired on, or the holiday piece, on or before June 30th, 2026, with the benefit no longer offered July 1st. Again, negatively impacting 0 employees. And then the sick leave payout, the other option would be to align it to say anyone who's currently met the AST agreement requirement of 10 years with the district could be the ones to retain that benefit. And again, it would sunset June 30th with it going away completely July 1st. That would negatively impact 81 individuals, some who may have 9.999 years with the district. As an AST, right. The 10 years are required to be in the AST group. So we just wanted to share that piece with you. So on May 26th, we'd ask you to take action on the proposed options outlined. And then the retiree benefit piece, Mr. Hamden will do first with you guys, of course. And then this piece will come up. What questions can I answer?
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, all right, so we're talking about, in this case, AST retirement benefits as far as taking their sick leave payout and that. However, it might be my imagination, but I am not sure how many in the AST group retire each year. So it's more a matter of exactly what are we looking at from year to year. And I guess I would like that information for the board meeting? as far as
One
be able to-
clarification, that sick payout is not a retirement benefit.
Okay,
It's any separation other than termination.
and
After
how many people
10 years.
separate?
Right, so that varies.
Okay.
That varies every year, but we have the HR data. So it's from HR here. What am I looking at? 2025, 26, and the dollar amount will vary, so let's see here. So last year, if this is just the sick payouts, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I'm counting that real quick, these are individual lines. And then the year before that, 2, 4, 5. And then the year before that was much bigger.
Can we get the
But
cost of that?
it all depends.
Like,
But
can we get like the last 10 years' cost of what we paid out for sick days?
say that again, sorry?
Like the last 10 years of sick day payout that we've spent in the
Yeah.
district for AST?
I believe that was what was sent earlier, but here's, like last year was 164,000. There's a $50,000 budget line, but it all depends. How many people retire that year, what their sick balance was, and what their rate of pay is at the time.
And it's not just retirees, so sick payout is, you can just leave
Separate.
the separation, right? So you can retire or separate, provided the district's not asking you to leave, and you have 10 years of service. So there's gonna be two components to that.
Yeah, like Hodges, we paid
Okay.
like $9,000.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Price, you had a question?
Oh, just a simple one. So I'm understanding the professional development, we're surrendering that one? Getting rid of that one?
Yes, that's a stipend that is provided. They can earn multiple stipends up to $4,500 annually, and that is something that we've said we would surrender to a line.
How many people
that's
were
not
using it?
preferred.
Or, I mean, what was the numbers for, I'm just curious how, ballpark? Okay.
69. I just want to make sure it's on the record.
Any other questions? So just to clarify, is it the recommendation that you would like to phase out the AST agreement?
Oh, the board directive was to move it into the employee handbook.
Okay.
So we would be doing that, we'd be moving it into the employee handbook. So these items then would appear in that location.
So that's the draft that's in front of you. So you'll see a fully stricken AST agreement because it would no longer exist. And then you should see in the handbook where the bold red is under the sections where we would recommend that being included. And I did just want to go back to Dr. Price's question. So there were 69 individuals who received it for a total of $109,500, and that would be the surrender component for the professional development stipend.
Thanks for the clarifications. Mr. Tierney?
And then could you guys bring rationale of like how we're gonna ask the community for a referendum and then cut you a check for sick days? Only you guys? Cause like, just basing off the average salary I know you guys, that's $30,000 if you max out. That we're gonna cut you a check to leave that's, if everybody got it, I wouldn't say anything, but that's, I don't see how you guys are,
So the,
you know?
yeah. So the rationale for phasing it out was that, I guess much like we heard from there are people who have been in the district, working here for 30 years, 35 years. They were working, and a promise was made to them that they would get that. So I think along those lines, I just think it's the right thing to do to honor that. As new people come into the district, we won't make that promise to them, and that can be phased out. So I really see it as honoring the word that was given to some of our employees who have, dedicated their entire careers here, that they would get that and honoring that. So that's my rationale for it. And then moving forward, not to offer it in the future.
I mean, I would agree with you if everybody knew this agreement existed, the district knew it existed, like that.
I know, and the way that these agreements come about, this was,
Like, if we're gonna build trust with the community, I think grandfathering ain't gonna be.
yeah, well, the way the agreements came about is that with collective bargaining, there was like one set of bargaining rules that ended in 2013. There were things that were done on the administrator side because it was different. There weren't necessarily collective bargaining rules, so there were agreements made. And some of those things that we're seeing now are those legacy agreements. Moving forward, we can change it, the board can change it as it will. My recommendation is just to, I see this as preventing less disruption in the district to grandfather. That's my recommendation.
Ms. Landry?
So what happens if we don't grandfather them in?
I can't, they wouldn't get the payout. Beyond that, and I'm not trying to be flip, I don't know. I imagine that we'd have more retirements, people trying to get in under the current rules. That's my biggest concern, is that it would create disruption and difficulty filling roles moving into next school year. I guess that's my biggest concern.
Any other questions?
I had a
Ms.
question.
Cullen?
Grandfathering is pretty common, like it's a very common practice. Has legal said anything in terms of liability of not grandfathering?
There's most likely there wouldn't, I'm not sure if I'd like to give that opinion in closed session, just because it's potential litigation. I don't want to necessarily, it could be potential litigation, so I feel much more comfortable giving that in closed session, and we could do that on May 26th, as opposed to an open session. And I could invite in legal counsel to provide that.
Ms. Landry?
So would, the question just left my mind. I'll come back.
I don't think anybody else has any other questions. So ask the question. All right. Nothing else? All right. Next item on the agenda is the operational referendum discussion. Dr. Weiss.
Yes, so we did dive into this at Audit Budget Finance. I guess just to preview the discussion that I hope to have on May 26th would be, I'd hope to have a discussion about potential timing, November or April, recurring, non-recurring, and amount. I'd like to have that conversation at the board level. I think that would help us plan out our next steps.
Just quick reminder, those numbers have changed and what's in there.
You want to give that run through again tonight, or?
No, my blood pressure's high enough.
All right. Any discussion from the board? Nobody wants to give any feedback about the referendum tonight?
Okay.
Ms. Landry?
I think if we are going to do a referendum, we should give ourselves as much time to prepare and work on gaining that trust of the community. I feel like right now we're not there and a referendum wouldn't pass. I think there's a lot more work to do, and I feel like the direction the AST agreement goes is going to have a huge effect on referendum speak, so, yeah.
Any further discussion? No? All right, next item. Revision of policy rule 6633, student technology acceptable use, first reading. Dr. Weiss. Oh, wait, I skipped one, I'm sorry.
Yep.
School board goal setting.
Yep, school board goal setting on page 79 of your packet. These are the goal areas that the board landed on at our last meeting. In the far right-hand column, I have the metrics that I'd be proposing we use to assess ourselves, or that the board would use. So just as when we look at budgeting and community engagement, there's two scores because we combined that one question into one goal. And basically, it's about a half-point improvement over the previous survey with the addition of, and I use that kind of as a measure. The next one is a full point. And then there's some other areas too that are added in, board members attending public referendum listening sessions for the first goal. For culture, board modeling mutual respect and professional behavior from a 2 to a 3 is the goal. I have also contacted, and Denise has contacted, Cheryl Stinsky, thank you, who did our last session to see about doing some board development with Ms. Stinsky. And then culture, we're looking at like a 0.8 increase from 1.7 to 2.5 on the self-assessment that's administered in February. So those are the goals that the board, my recommendation for goal targets.
Any discussion or feedback? I did have one question. So is it your plan at the May board meeting for us to go over some suggestions in terms of additional metrics or things that we could be doing to meet those
Yeah,
goals?
that could definitely be part of the discussion.
Okay.
These are my recommendations and just looking at the survey and trying to think of other strategies that would work, but these are the board's goals, so absolutely.
Okay. One of the things that I have in terms of feedback on the culture piece was I'm kind of curious about how we can visit our governance practices to make sure that, our practices are more inclusive of the community's expectations, but also aligned to the piece about making sure that the decisions we make are reflective of the interests of students. And I have some ideas of that, but of course that, we could open that up to a
Yeah,
larger.
if you send them ahead of time, maybe I can incorporate it.
For sure.
Yep.
You can
If you
hear
send
me
it to
just
me
fine.
ahead of time, I can incorporate it into my presentation.
Yeah, put on the microphone.
This is your friendly reminder to speak close to the microphone because the people at home cannot hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Cullen?
Is there any way for that last one, that culture one, to get feedback from the community as opposed to it just being a self-assessment?
I wonder if, Mr. Keckler, is there any question that we put out in the community survey? We did a community survey, correct?
Not that specific community one. Our last public one was the parent guardian one,
Parent
which
guardian.
was open to the entire community, and there was a qualifier question, if they currently had a student, previously had a student, or was just a community member. The vast majority of responses, usually when we do that, are current parents, some prior, and I want to say maybe there was 20 people that just checked the box, they were a community member, and still took the survey then. But that's a minimal one. We really have not, aside from like the right sizing piece of getting feedback, that's the last time it was a community-directed one. We do have the capabilities, so.
Okay, it was just an idea, or, I was interested too, I was reading some of the stuff, Madison was using some of their college students to do like surveys and stuff of the community, I don't know if that's ever an option to use like Parkside, or, I don't want it to be an extra cost for us to survey the community, but I just don't know if there's other ways to do that.
At this stage, it would be time and effort,
Yeah,
which is an equatable cost, but
yeah, it's still a cost, so,
we have the current capabilities to do that if that was the directive.
okay, it's just an idea.
Any other questions or comments? All right, next item, revision of policy and rule 6633.
Mr. Keckler?
Yeah, thank you. This was the one that's born out of the state directive to basically have a wireless communication device policy enacted and approved by a school board, every school board, by July 1. So instead of a separate policy, which we were developing, we decided to integrate this with the student acceptable use policy. This got obviously some healthy discussion at the last joint standing committee. We took some feedback from that, as well as had a meeting with representatives, either administration or from the Behavior Management Office of all the secondary schools, to kind of get feedback how they were utilizing this in any capacity at their buildings. More often than not, the school still would like the ability to have the instructional option, and this varies by class. You know, you have like digital art classes or digital photography classes where the filters on the phone are used by the students for their projects, and thus we don't have to buy a bunch of advanced cameras for them. So there's some trade-offs in that. But where they've seen kind of the most success is when, and we put this in the policy draft, is that when there is a clear identifier on the board, and so they usually kind of have a red light, green light if the cell phone is to be used that day or could be used that day, and then also clear directives from the instructor on how they expect those devices or how they could be utilizing those devices. But we still have a lot of schools that have really no usage or no expected usage. As far as the behavior management of it goes, just saying if we had a bell-to-bell ban does not absolve us from kids having their cell phones out, so they still would have to handle it in that fashion. We do have quite a range of those expectations. I know some board members had questions. There's a building right now that if it's your first offense, they expect to grab it and hold it for the rest of the day. There's another building where it's your third offense before it gets to that level. So some of that inconsistency we would look to try and equate across the district so it could be managed in a more consistent fashion. But the current version of the policy then took those revisions and feedback. Again, we're kind of under the timeline, and I'd probably equate this a little bit to the recent AI policy. There's not going to be a perfect one. It's just going to be how we could manage it. But unfortunately, we do have to have something approved by the board by July 1. So again, it's your prerogative, but we can always revisit it as well.
And I do believe, and Mr. Haithcock, I believe it's for this item that we were working on having Mahone Middle School present.
Yeah, there's two schools coming to present that idea of, there's a couple ideas that we feel like are really working, where they have pouches where kids come in and put their phones in a pouch. That's working for us. And then we have schools coming, there's a school coming to talk about how they use red zones and green zones, that they post that in the room to make the expectations clear. I will just add what Mr. Keckler, to reiterate what Mr. Keckler said. I think whatever that policy is, it really is about follow through with that policy and trying to stay as consistent with it as possible. And kids get frustrated when 75% of the teachers are doing it consistently, and some people get busy and they just don't see it, right? They're teaching, they're working, they're trying to get 26 kids to learn calculus, and they might not see it. And so I think it's always going to be sincere effort to do the best we can. I think we've had a lot of improvement the last couple of years. We're talking about another refining of narrow it down to some strategies and finding some consistency between how quickly we will move towards. So I think we could get a little bit tougher to provide a little bit more consistency to have better results. It's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be a constant battle. It's like addressing dress code. You gotta stay on it, or else it starts to slide.
So just to clarify, the feedback that was incorporated into the policy following the committee meeting, am I understanding it correctly then that what you did was you kind of looked at what schools were doing, some of the best practices, you tried to standardize them across in policy, or?
It was to kind of going from the standing committee feedback and what was produced from there, and then revisiting that. And so we had representatives from all of our secondary schools. It doesn't mean that there's not cell phones at the elementary. It's just really the interactive pieces at the secondary right now, and to give them that voice and get that honest feedback. What's their awareness of their use in the building, their obstacles and struggles from a behavior management standpoint. And it pretty much is the whole range, but again, as Mr. Haithcock said, you need some of that consistency, and you need some of that leveling of the expectations if we are going to allow for this. Again, the state statute is pretty clear. We still have to allow for emergency situations, modifications for students with 504s or IEPs. things of that nature. And it does allow for a district to have in their policy to allow for instructional use. It's still the board's prerogative, but it's one in which that, and I think you'll see that with a couple representatives that we have to come speak about it, that there still are some educationally fundamental valued areas that could be utilized if it's done so in a proper manner. That doesn't mean everybody's gonna follow through, or, you know, somebody doesn't have two cell phones on them, which exists, and, you know, you take one and then another one appears, and they're like rabbits out there, but.
Yeah, I was just making sure that I understood what the revisions were so that, you know, it was clarified for the board, so.
I just want to point out too, like, this is, and you know this, but this is an ever-evolving,
Right.
you know, meta glasses that are a kid's prescription glasses. Like, this is, we're going to be talking about this for a long time going forward.
And the
in terms
reminder
of
that-
how we're going to keep adjusting
Yeah,
and
it's just not
responding to
cell
the
phones.
needs.
Where it's wireless communication, which, you know, you get into with the smart watches, the Meta glasses, and, you know, the struggle isn't just with the staff or the students, it's helping the parents understand that. And for the parents that really want to ensure that control, there are parental controls that they could enact on their children's phone to basically shut them off during school time, but still track them or contact them if there's an emergency. So, you know, we want to kind of educate the families on that as well. Because some parents get frustrated and say, well, you know, I don't want you taking my kid's phone because now you're going to be responsible if it cracks or something like that. So whether they're the pouches on the walls, you know, there's some secure lock stations. Again, you know, we're trying to do this where, like, those pouches are $12 each. But if we, you know, have 1,700 classrooms across the district, $12 times that is going to be quite a bit, so.
Right, yep, thank you. So, question for Mr. Tierney?
Yeah, why can't we ever put in policy like if you violate this, here's the punishment. This is a cell phone, it's not behavior, it's not interpretation, it gives teacher no power. Because I know, like, the biggest complaint from a lot of teachers is, sent the kid to the principal's office, came back with a candy bar. Like, you do that all the time because there's no punishment for the kid. Like, this should be simple. Caught once, it does this. Caught twice, it does this. Caught 3 times, your parents come get it. Like, if we want to stop something, we gotta have, that's what, everything's open to. Corrective actions may happen, or
Yeah,
discipline may happen. It
Now,
doesn't happen.
just in general, I can answer that. And this is an example that Mr. Heathcock and I have talked about quite a bit, is take an example of a fight. What is a fight? Is a fight 3 people beating up 1 kid and causing him to go to the hospital? Well, I'm talking in generalities about policy and why we allow for professional judgment when it comes to assigning consequences. Because are there extenuating circumstances? Is it a zero tolerance if you have a phone no matter what? But if you're in one of those circumstances that Mr. Keckler just mentioned, where you're using it for an art photo class, I'm saying that's why. Yeah.
I do think that there should be some consistency in terms of how, but I'm just saying that the absolutes that you're suggesting, the kid that is on the phone in the hallway, that you yank it out of his phone and you find out that the kid's grandfather died in that moment, like, it just has to take some professional judgment and common sense in terms of how we deal with it. And so we do absolutely believe in progressive discipline for things. And so keeping track of what's happening, there's only so many times you can explain your way out of something, right? And so I agree with what you're saying, just saying that I don't think it's quite that cut and dried, but I don't think we're far from each other.
If Grandpa dies, I can call the office. If my grandpa dies, I can call the office, they can come get me and tell me my grandpa's dead now.
Yeah, I'm
They
just
don't need a
saying
phone.
that,
They don't absolutely need a phone.
I'm just saying how you respond to that kid in that moment matters.
Well, if we, I don't know.
I think Dr. Price had a
do the phone?
response to that.
I know you've thought about these different things, especially our curriculum people. Maybe having like some student ambassadors to kind of like teach other kids. I think that as much as we want to put this on the teacher to, you know, monitor, surveil, discipline, I wish we could give our teachers a break and just basically have kids model the best behavior. You know, there's kids that basically recognize that it's addictive and that they use their phone too much, and maybe recruit those kids instead of going all zero tolerance, because zero tolerance only works in the military. It doesn't work anywhere else. So I think the issue would be just how we, roll this out. I'd bring the kids in.
I do think that what we're suggesting here for people that want us to be tougher on cell phones, I would stand here and look you in the eye and say, we're doing that.
Any other discussion? Ms. Cullen?
I think this might have been what you were getting at, Carl, but I'm wondering if we could have in the policy, because it sounds like we have some schools that have very clear, structure to how the phones are used, right? But they're doing them differently, like they've figured out a system that works for their school. So I'm just wondering, is it possible for the policy to say that every school will have a clear cell phone policy that is clear to the parent, to the public, like that every school, because I don't know, maybe it's in here and I'm not seeing it. I see it says like district staff will work to review appropriateness and but do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I did interject.
Sounds like that's what you're going
I
to.
added that
Can
for the
we-
classroom level, that it will be clearly delineated, and they call them, you'll hear them speak about red zone and green zones, and they'll have the little cell phone icon, and some of them have different visuals, and then to follow that up with what those expectations are, and these are the specific reasons. So even if you have the allowance for part of the class for the students to use the cell phone, that doesn't mean that they still couldn't violate it by misuse or using it outside of those expectations. And so, again, it's one in which that we don't want that to be a distraction. We never have. We want it to be something that benefits the students in their learning and understanding when the teacher's comfortable with it. And so it'll probably be used more in a limited sense now, because you really have to define what those expectations are, and the kids would be bound to that. Right now, it's hard pressed to say, on any given day, are cell phones being used 13% of the time? I just think this tightens it up a little bit more, and we are looking for that consistency as well. But then it also goes with what we have for staff to be able to manage those expectations, and it's unfortunate that even when you have all those expectations spelled out, and you can have the parents sign off ahead of time, I agree that this is gonna happen. Every one of these buildings has a parent come in and start to berate and yell at the staff for following through on what they agreed to in the first place, which only adds to it. And then they email the board, and then they start, just ramping it up. So it's again, we're trying to manage it in a way that is beneficial to us, but it's not always followed through in that manner.
Any other questions? None? All right, we'll move on to the next item, revision of the activities of code of conduct.
Thank you. The activities code is required by KUSD Board of Education to meet the requirements of WIAA. So as participation in activities, that is a privilege. Therefore, those individuals are held to a standard. We bring this forward often to align with revisions of policy and in alignment with our current practices as we evolve. So I apologize, there is a mistake on this, this report. That first paragraph in the second column, you should see up to crossed off. So when we highlighted, we took off the cross off, and I will update that for the May 26th report. So the change here is that prior to this revision, we had said committee formed by the principal and or designee. We actually have a appeals hearing committee that would hear appeals, and that is a process that we adhere to, and it does include the building principal. So we just cleaned up that language there. So those are the two changes on both of those boxes. One is to omit the up to 1 calendar year. So it would be a calendar year for those group 1 violations, and then you could go to the appeals hearing if you choose to. The next update would be to just clean up what we do. We don't have activity participants walk around with a piece of paper anymore getting great reports from every one of their teachers. Our athletics department runs a report weekly to give to those coaches or activity advisors. So that's just a, let's get with modern times, work smarter, more efficiently. We've also just cleaned up the additions to the sports and activities, adding boys lacrosse, girls wrestling, and flag football in the table of activities. So Brian Mogensen will be here at the board meeting to answer any questions that you may have regarding this report.
Any feedback from the board? Dr. Price?
Yeah, I having some kids that are athletes, I think the process is pretty rigorous, actually. And I know sometimes some kids have had a legitimate gripe about a grade or some such thing. And I know we want to be really strict, but I know that a lot of kids really love the athletics, and I just want to keep them in.
It's very motivational for
However we
kids.
can
There's
use
a
it.
lot of data on when you're in season or preparing for season, you have better grades, better attendance, better behavior for certain. So yes, our athletics department does a real good job, and if you have a coach in that building for your sport, as an employee and a coach, we have really good success about building those relationships and connections with the kids and keeping them doing what they need to be doing to stay eligible.
Anything else? All right, next item, request for approval of 26-27 Head Start State Supplemental Grant.
Yep, and we have Ms. Lopez, Mrs. Lopez from the Head Start, and Mr. Haithcock. There's actually two items with Head Start supplemental grant approval we're asking for, and then the transportation waiver. So I'll turn it over to them.
So the Head Start state supplemental grant, we come to you every year and ask for permission to apply for that. And so we're just asking for your approval to do that. We did the federal grant in March. I think we got we apply for 2.68 million, something like that. Through the federal one, we're asking for just shy of $324,000 now from the state to maintain current programming that we're using. We have this every year. We're not planning program changes or anything like that. So this is something that you're used to hearing. Our next item is something new. We are going to ask for your permission to apply for a federal waiver to the bus monitor requirement. So picture not the bus driver, there's a bus monitor who rides along on that bus as a second adult on the bus. That is, the feds allow, it's interesting that the state and local rules don't require that, but the feds do have a rule that requires it, but they allow this process for it to ask for a waiver to not do that. Why are we doing that? Because we're just facing some financial challenges that I'll get into in just a minute here. But to explain a little bit deeper, we go and pick up, we have 3 start times for schools. We have 3 different, and so those buses sometimes will run a Head Start route and then run a different special ed route, or then run different routes that they're out there assigned to. And so when we put a person on a route, they have to be on all 3 routes. And so this starts to become an efficiency problem in terms of, we have 50 kids across the city that we're transporting on these on these buses. It is required, and we're not going to change if a kid has an IEP for transportation that says they need a monitor. We're still going to continue to monitor, to provide that for those students. What we're talking about is not just carte blanche putting a monitor on every bus route with every kid that goes through there, because we feel like some of the kids don't need that. We're still going to maintain all of the standards of safety. We're going to have certified drivers and all the proper restraints and everything that should be on a bus, so that the safety will continue to be there. The Head Start Policy Council has reviewed this and voted unanimously to approve this. Why are we requesting it now? For the last 3 years, So we've talked about whether there would be an interruption to federal funding for Head Start. There has not been, but there has not been a cost of living increase to that funding that's been coming to us for 3 years now. At the same time, the cost for us for these monitors has gone from $40,000 over the last 3 years to over $100,000. And so you can see where the not getting that cost of living increase it's making things difficult for us to meet budget. We don't want to cut services that we're offering to the number of students, that kind of thing. We think this is a way where we can safely provide monitors on the buses where kids with IEPs that need it will still get it, but we won't just carte blanche give it to every bus as we have been doing.
Just a question. I know on regular school buses, and it boggles the mind, they don't have to have seatbelts. But special ed buses do have, the Head Start buses do have the seatbelts?
There's not Head Start buses.
No,
The
they're
Head
just
Start kids are riding on the small
buses.
buses, and they have 5-point restraints
Okay.
on all of them, and they would continue to have 5-point restraints. So that would not go away at all.
And the driver then, instead of, if they were picking up the kids and there was no monitor on, the driver would make sure that the kids were
Right.
secure and
Right.
everything.
And I met with the manager of the busing company about that, and we discussed that. All of those bus drivers are trained in how to do that. They often are doing it anyway, even if the monitor's there. So there's very few kids on those buses. There's just a couple of kids at a time. And so it's really not, it's more like riding around in a van with your children. It's not like, the big buses. It's these little buses and just a few children. Those bus monitors are charging our company about $30 an hour for
Just riding in the bus.
just riding the
with no-
bus, and they may only have a Head Start student on there for 15 minutes.
Okay.
But we're being charged for 6 hours.
I will also point out to you that it is a very difficult position it's not the highest paid position that is out there. And so keeping those positions fully staffed has been a challenge, trying to sub people in those. And so we're not, the system, the way it is, just the way it happens is you have to hire somebody to do that work, and sometimes we struggle with that.
Any other questions? All right, next item. Thank you. Next item is request to participate in community eligibility provision, National School Breakfast and Lunch Programs. Dr. Weiss?
Yep, thank you. We did discuss this at the last Facilities Committee meeting, but Emily was in charge of our food service. I'm sorry?
I said I was in Indiana at the
Yes,
time.
was unable to join us due to a family emergency. So this is, she's here tonight. If there's any questions, she'll be here on the 26th. But basically, this is our food service program, which is in a different fund. It's in Fund 50. It only can be used on food service. However, and we had a pretty significant surplus in it, and one of our corrective actions was to spend that surplus down. We've done that, and now that we're at a point where we did that by providing lunches and breakfast to all students. We're now at a point where we need to go back to our old practices and just make it based on free reduced lunch eligibility. And hopefully I didn't take away all your thunder, Emily, but that's what's before
No,
the board.
that's good, that's good. So just to kind of reiterate on what the CEP is, it's kind of nuanced and many people don't quite understand it. It's complicated even for us. It allows us to provide free breakfasts and lunches, and it uses data at the school level for students who receive food share, W-2, Head Start, homeless, foster students. And then if the school has 25% of those identified, they could participate in the CEP. In 23-24, as Dr. Weiss said, we moved to a district-wide CEP, and at the time, we had quite a significant balance to the point of we were kind of in trouble with DPI over that. So it's currently costing us about $250,000 a month out of the Fund 50 fund balance. And so it's not sustainable moving forward. And so I've run the numbers many times in order to come up with the best way to still offer those meals to students at our high poverty schools. And I don't know if you want me to read through them all or, okay. And so we're, at the committee meeting, there was some good feedback on and understanding why this needs to happen, as well as making sure that we communicate this to families. And so I've already spoken to Tanya and Chris about how we can do that, and we've come up with a timeline of basically CEP start to finish and implementation, how we're going to do that. And so that would be our, what we're looking for is to approve this, to move forward and go back to that traditional way prior to 324, sorry, totally forgot.
Any questions? Ms. Landry?
2 questions. Can you explain the reason why Bradford is not on there?
Yes, I can. Bradford, the way that you put the CEP grouping together is on totals and adding 1,400 students to that grouping with only about half brought the average down significantly. And we're trying to get to where operating the CEP doesn't impact Fund 50, because if we go negative, we're in trouble. So we don't want that to happen, and so we would still need to contribute money, non-federal funds, so we would have to be selling lots and lots of a la carte or trying to make that up somehow. There's not just people handing out money to food service, but so that would be why we did not include them, even though their percentage is higher. It's just it's a numbers game, and I tried hundreds of configurations to make it work, but financially it's would not be a smart move for us.
Any other questions?
Okay, in the case of Bradford or any school that's not on the list here, if any student who is free and reduced eligible can have the forms filled out, and then they do get their free. So at a high school level, I would say that if a student wanted to get that free meal, they would make sure that those forms got filled out. No.
Yes, I didn't mention that, so thank you. Yes, so the schools that would not be CEP schools would revert back to completing that free and reduced application. And so that is part of the communication that we're working on, that we would be, doing our best to get that out in front of the families as soon as possible. We're not allowed to collect that until after July 1st. And so once we know what direction the board will take, we're able to then start working with our online application to get that ready to go. But yeah, so that would revert back to that traditional status. There is a carryover period, so it's not as if on the first day, if you went to Bradford, you wouldn't be able to eat. So it is a carryover of 30 operating days or until a new determination is made. So if a family submits that application in August, that would be their new determination. But if we didn't quite get to that family right away and they not quite understanding, they would have that time to still complete an application. So I did confirm that with DPI.
Confirm and reiterate, though, if you're directly certified, you're automatically
Most of our students
Correct.
are directly certified, meaning they don't
no
have to fill out
form
the
needed.
paperwork.
Yes, so we have about, usually every year, we've got about 8,000 matches. Obviously, with the enrollment going down, that changes, but about 8,000 or so typically are matched on that direct cert. So those would be those families on food share, W-2, so.
Mr. Tooney?
you think this might improve too for the kids that are on the program, that maybe they'll get a little more food now? Because I've heard a lot of complaints sometimes with it being free for everybody. Sometimes it runs low and, you know, certain kids don't get a bunch of food sometimes.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So like, since we're limiting it back to the kids that qualify, do you think that's gonna improve their quality maybe, but like maybe they get a little bit more food, or does that make any sense? Because I've heard complaints where like they run out of chicken fingers where you get one.
Well, I would hope that doesn't happen. So,
Happened last week at a couple schools.
the meals that we serve, we're part of the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program and have very strict guidelines that we do need to follow. Fat, sodium, calories, whole grains. And so the food that we serve meets those requirements and are actually more strict because of how regulations are. We're meeting targets that are coming 2 years from now. So I don't foresee what we're serving in that capacity. We have already set our menus for next year and looking at, you know, we're always looking to revamp and offer new things. And so hopefully we can do that. It's something that I usually tell parents or students even that I get emails and complaints or concerns about is that just because you're eating chicken nuggets, they're not the chicken nuggets you can go to the grocery store and buy. This is an entire segment of the food chain basically that is for K-12. And so those, they do taste different. There's less things that are, you know, make it taste good but are not as healthy, so.
Ms. Cullen?
For the parents that have to fill out the form for the application, is it something that can be done on their phone?
Yes, I actually did, my son is a student, and I did it on my phone this year as the first application to test if it was working. So yes, you can do it right from your phone. It usually takes a few minutes. It walks you through with the instructions. It's I think, quite intuitive, but we've had parents call and we've walked them through it. So yeah, it can be done on your phone. It isn't electronic, but we do have the option for paper. That's a requirement that we would have it if a family would not have access.
Ms. Landry?
All right, one last question. What kind of communication are you guys going to put out? Like, you said you've been discussing different ways to communicate this out to parents. What are some of those examples? Because
Yeah,
that's my
so-
biggest concern.
Yep, so we would obviously, Parent Square, we would use as one of the main ways. I just saw on the school calendars, when I was printing them earlier today for something else, that it does have the open house dates, and we're looking to have our food service staff at those open houses, so that way we would have that information, and especially targeting those non-CEP schools, to have the information there. I know that we've talked about, it was mentioned like National Night Out. We can have flyers with the QR codes, you know, and having at registrations, if that's, you know, at the high school level. I'm not quite familiar with that, but I know I've talked to Tanya about helping us with getting that information out. I've spoken to Chris as well about maybe having some type of kiosk or something at the schools, and getting one set up here should a family be here for something. And I think it's going to be a lot too on, you know, the school level and at conferences and trying to get information, you know, to the families as well. And we're open to suggestions as well if someone else has another way that they think might help reach those families.
Any other questions? I just had a quick one. I think this might be a TARG question. I'm not sure that there's any connection between this and like the state reimbursements for school lunch and school breakfast, but I know that that reimbursement has been stagnant for years. Do we anticipate that with participation being adjusted here, that it's going to have any sort of impact on the reimbursements we're expecting?
Yeah,
I think, I do think that we will have some decrease in participation. And we what's different about our programs is we get reimbursed for the meals we serve versus other district where you get it maybe upfront or in quarterly. So we submit a monthly reimbursement. So I do think that will go down, you know, but right now with serving everybody, our food costs are higher. So I do think it will be proportional to that. And we do get federal reimbursement. We also get a state match, and that hasn't really changed either on what we get for those. But yeah, I think it will go down. I just don't obviously know how much. It's hard to, you know, really predict. We haven't had a normal year since before COVID of free, reduced, and paid, and some weird transition in there. So it's kind of hard we tried to look at it, but it just doesn't, the district doesn't look like it did back then either. So it's kind of hard to know for sure.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you. The next item, revision of Rule 3520, school nutrition programs, first and second reading. Sorry, Emily.
That's okay. I didn't want to talk about them together because they're kind of separate. They do go hand in hand. So the policy 3520, it was updated in 2023. That was part of the WASB recommendations. And there were some USDA requirements that required us to update that policy when in regards to unpaid meal charges. And so when we updated this policy, we were 100% CEP. So we had to update it so that the language that's in here reflects the district-wide CEP model, which we would be moving away from, obviously, as long as that is what would be approved. And so the language in here removes that district language and refers to a school. And so this policy, or excuse me, the rule that would be updated is really just impacting those students at schools that would be CEP. So they would still get to eat their breakfast and lunch. It would just impact the negative balance they could accrue by purchasing a milk or any other snack items that they might want to purchase. Then the non-CEP schools would revert back to the language that's already in the policy about the negative balances that they're allowed to accrue. And again, that is something that we're required to have per federal regulations and accounting purposes. And that was, when that was put in the policy, that was just brought forward with what was already being done back then, so.
And could you just speak a minute about the alternative lunch
Oh,
when
yes.
you do have a negative
Yes,
balance?
so once they would reach the threshold for that negative meal, in elementary school, it is negative 19.25, and the middle and high schools, they're not allowed to charge for any meals. And so we've usually, when we were not CEP, was a courtesy snack. We don't want them to go hungry, but we still have to, we want to provide them with something. And so typically that's been like graham crackers, applesauce, and a milk. We have to look at the regulations on, again, what we serve them. And so it might just be how we ring it up versus what we offer them. But so they still would be provided that. In addition, we had notices that would get handed to the older students, like your account is low. And then we also send home notices weekly to anyone with a negative balance. So that way families are aware that their child is negative. And so we will continue to do that. Parent Square has made it easy to, hit the button or print it out if it doesn't go through. So they would still get something, just not a complete meal.
Any questions from the board? Sounds like a better alternative meal than the cheese sandwiches I used to get. No questions? All right, now thank you.
Thanks.
We are now moving on to the next item, which is open enrollment applicants for school year 26-27. It's Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Bryan. This is your annual approval of the recommendations from the district on the open enrollment applications that we received. By looking at the report, you can see that, first off, as far as resident students applying to go outside of the district, it was 232, and we have 88 requesting to come in. Just please keep in mind that 232 are not all currently enrolled. You're going to have some in there that are homeschooled. They still have to kind of pass through us to be confirmed as a resident. So you're going to have private school enrollments in there. Some students that we've never seen, yes, the majority, or at least the simple majority, are currently enrolled, and you can see that usually it's at the earlier grade level or at one of the turns for like 6th grade or 9th grade. To put it in perspective, these are new applications. The average though, and we've kind of shared this before, but just to remind you that like the last 4-year averages as far as resident students that go outside of KUSD has been about 720, and we've had about 220 that have come in, and so there's always been that. It's not exactly 4-to-1 ratio, but it's one in which that is we do see more exits than we do entrances that are in here. So we went through our typical process, a blind lottery, assigning these, and then also went through the conditions, preferences for siblings, or if there are preferences for school, and then taking that in account with current enrollment projections for those schools, and then assigning placement. So the vast majority of the time, we do offer these seats to the students in these recommendations. Usually, the denials are for specific schools that didn't have space or unable to support their specific students with special needs accommodations. So the next step then is, pending the board's approval for this, we have to notify the families that they are offered a space, then they have some time to accept it. So this goes through a several-week process, played out over the next, into the summertime period, so. Any questions?
Questions? None? All right, we have a number of resolutions following that. So the first is resolution in appreciation to Yolanda Adams. Does anybody want to read that? You'll do that for the May meeting. Does anybody want to do Juneteenth? Sabrina. The one that I wrote last year, if anybody wants to take a resolution affirming student belonging and inclusion in the month of June, I'd be happy to read it again. Mary, if you want to do that.
Could I ask a question about the order of the resolutions?
Sure.
Given that we've got a pretty lengthy agenda,
Okay.
I'm wondering if what's that? I was wondering if we could move the resolution for Yolanda Adams to the beginning of the agenda, just so she doesn't.
Yeah.
She's not coming? Okay, all right. All right, does not matter, I guess.
Okay. All right, then the resolution encouraging municipal transparency regarding private school voucher costs, including in the KOSD property tax levy, which, by the way, I would like it to be stated, I wrote that, but I'm happy to give it up to anybody.
I would like to say one thing.
Who wants to?
No, I think Robin would be great, but I just want to point out, I was one of the original researchers on the school voucher project. Been fighting this for 30 years. But I think you should do it. No,
Mr.
because
President.
we had a conversation about that 6 months ago before. I think you should read it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's your fault.
As related to that topic, I do have a meeting with the mayor on Monday.
Okay.
Because I did want to give him a heads up, so I will be meeting with him to let him know it's coming.
Okay.
So it won't be a surprise, but we are going to send that out then to the municipalities.
If there's any feedback, if you want to opt to bring that up, yep. And then the school board committees update, we'll do that at the end. And then next, we have, you are not done yet, we have a review of current standing committees and agenda review meeting structures, so.
Could I have an idea for that. Do you mind if I bring it up? One of the things that, so this is, when we went to the committee, to the more frequent committee meetings, the board also voted to continue agenda reviews through May. So this is technically our last one that was approved by the board. We have, one of the goals one of the strategies coming out of one of the board goals was to work with WASB, and specifically Cheryl Stinsky. One of the board goals is around governance. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful, this is just an idea, if we could, when Cheryl comes in, if that could be part of the discussion about committee of the whole structure and the committee structure, and have her perspective from the state level, if that would be helpful for the board. Doing it here is fine too. I was just wondering if the board would like to have that additional perspective that Cheryl could bring.
We have that scheduled for when? June 1st, okay. Mr. Tierney?
I will say, I'm sure Robin got it too, that one of the biggest things people really like in the community is us doing these meetings like this right now. And those community meetings aren't very effective, as we've seen so far. Less people show up, overloaded with stuff, don't have a lot of time to talk. So I think having them every other month, continuing, is, I like that, in my opinion.
Are you saying alternating?
Like how we've been doing it, but
How we
those
have
committee
been
meetings,
doing it?
we gotta figure that out, because sometimes you get a lot of information and you're just, bye. That's not a committee.
Ms. Landry?
If I had to choose, I would choose agenda review meetings. But I think we could swing both, if that's something that the rest of the board would want to do. But I feel like those agenda review meetings are crucial for maintaining the amount of trust we have right now with the community. I think if we take those away, I think it's going to be detrimental to the trust and transparency of the district.
Ms. Potter?
I think it's important that we continue the committee meetings. The agenda review meetings are fine, but to have the 6 committee meetings held, I think is very important. If you look at basically the history of the board, I was not a member of the board, but someone who always attended the committee meetings, and I was on the committees when they were very active and did a lot of things, and then actually they met every month. So the second Tuesday of the month was the committee meeting, and then the fourth Tuesday of the month was the board meeting. So, and I would go to both. And then they sort of became more different board members, and I won't make any, mention whom, but they didn't feel like they were very important, and so they sort of said, well, we don't have any business, so we're not having a board, we're not having the committee meetings and stuff, and they fell by the wayside, and the committee members felt that they weren't really being heard. We're just now getting back to where we are listening to our committee members. It is going to take some time. We heard some great feedback this past month, just this past hour. We heard some great feedback. I would hate to lose that, and I think it's going to get even better, so.
Thank you. Ms.
Yeah.
Stevens?
Yeah, I agree with Mary. I think it's really important that we build that, especially having that opportunity for people to serve and to better understand what the district's about and helping educate them so they can go out and say, okay, I understand it, I can share it with you. So I think it's really helpful.
Dr. Price?
I just was saying, this is my 5th year on the board, and when I first came on, the committee meetings were very modest. There wasn't much going on, but since then, I've seen community get pretty engaged, actually. Before some of the school board members were on the board, we had a policy committee meeting about flags and political candidate stuff in classrooms, and we had a huge turnout, and people came out of that feeling like we had a pretty good policy, actually. So I think that while different people come for different reasons, having different things like facilities, curriculum, referenda, I think committee structure is actually pretty strong, and I think we should keep it.
Mr. Tierney?
Yeah, I'm not like anti-committee. I just think sometimes we have so much information for 1 hour, and then to try to talk to people.
Right.
You're not getting, like, the committee is we're supposed to be talking and, brainstorming and stuff like that. But, and then the agenda reviews that we've been having, think about like Act 20. We've done, you guys have been able to do a lot of rollouts with stuff at this and not take up the whole regular board. I don't know. I just think it's good. You get a lot of information. People can watch it. So.
Anything else? Ms. Cullen, do you have anything?
Sorry, I'm just trying. Okay, so you're talking about ending the agenda review meetings, right? Is that?
Or whether to continue them, or.
Okay, yeah. I don't know, I'd have to think about it. I mean, it's a lot of information. I guess I would say that if they were discontinued, like, would it be possible to get the information earlier, like you get at the agenda review, so you have more time to look at it, as opposed to just the few days? But it gives us the chance to ask questions, because there's so much information to digest. I mean, I think that they're helpful.
I'm going to hand the proverbial gavel to Sabrina here to give my feedback just based on my own experience. I think, like, I'm just trying to synthesize and understand what people's needs are in this sense. And I think at the end of the day, whether we go to, committees or the agenda reviews, the idea is that, people want to have more transparency. They want to have more dialogue. They want to have more discussion. They want to have more community feedback. And I think in the situation that we're in right now, I mean, we could, I think the reason why we brought agenda reviews out in public was because of the fact that committees were not meeting enough. But because, to Mary's point, having been on the school board at the time when they were meeting monthly, I think people did come away feeling as though that, the community could weigh in on agenda topics that the board would then later vote on later on that month. And they literally met monthly to do that. And that was the community's voice on the things that the board was weighing in on. My opinion is, obviously these are kind of pulling ideas from two separate governance models, the committee of the whole versus the committee structure that we're doing as a district. Like, if we're going to go away from agenda reviews every other month, then the committees have to meet monthly. But if we're not going to meet monthly as committees, then, my opinion would be that we have to keep it as is, where it has to meet, where it has to be alternating. So just to maintain that consistent dialogue, every other month would be a work session of the board. That's just my personal belief, though. I'm not here to influence you. I'm here to take any motions that any of you guys want. I'm just offering that as my opinion. And essentially, but my position would be to do it as is, unless, one or the other meets monthly. That's my belief, So with that being said, is there a motion?
Motion to continue what we're doing.
Second.
Is that good enough for a motion? Okay. And just to clarify, we can visit this when we talk about this with the WASB consultant and get opinions. Yeah. All right, any further discussion on the motion on the floor? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. All right, so there we have it.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes, we passed over reviews and comments, so we'll take a motion to adjourn. Todd? is there a
Todd, second.
We got a closed session, remember?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries, we're adjourned, and board members stay here because we have a closed session after this.
Why don't